can't seem to recall.
Welcome to the social-engineer.org podcast number 51.
Number 51.
Yes. You see?
Number 51.
Oh. Whoa.
I got to do something here.
I don't even know what just happened. We have Dave and we have Mini Dave. Dave and Mini
I look
Dave.
just like him. Yeah.
Yeah, almost exactly like, except small and Japanese. But just like Dave, besides those two things.
Just like Dave, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you do have that goatee going on.
Who, me?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's nice.
Yeah, it is. It's great.
Sporting like
it's only here. It's only here that I can grow anymore. So.
So, Dave and Mini Dave, how are you this fine day?
Good. Doing great.
Fabulous.
Fabulous and good.
Just have to note that it's the three of us again. Ping is not going to make it, so I mean she's the one that's kind of dishing you guys now. I'm just throwing it out there.
And Dave, we appreciate it because we know how busy you've been.
Support the most awesome podcast ever. I mean, I know other people's priorities kind of get in the way, but I'm here for you guys. All right, so speaking of which, I have another call, so I gotta drop off, but it's been fun. I'm just kidding.
Awesome. And Michelle, how are you?
I'm great, thank you. It is a lovely Monday morning here on the West Coast.
It is lovely here, too. A little chilly, but nice on the East Coast. East Coast time. So, let's see. What do we got going on? Let's just do some quick introductions. A ton of stuff. We released the SECTF report and have been inundated with reporters and interviews and news stories. Even got slashdotted, which was kind of cool. Reports being downloaded heavily. We have our first ever webinar, which will actually be done by the time this podcast comes out. But hopefully that's going to go really well. We have close to 400 people signed up for that already. And it just keeps going up by the tens, like every couple hours. More and more people are signing up for that. That's going to be all about the SECTF report, the event, what's coming up in the future, how it worked, all that kind of stuff in detail. First time we're ever doing that, so we'll see how that works. That's been kind of inundating. I'm sorry.
Enjoyable read.
Thanks.
I read through it. Really enjoyable. Nice job on that.
Yeah, Michelle did the majority of the work with that. So the world can thank her for having the best report that we've ever had in 5 years.
I still haven't had any donations to my vacation fund, though. It's really unfortunate. Pretty disappointed about that.
They're coming in, but I forgot to tell you that the SE org cut.
I knew it.
Yeah, the SE org cut is about 90%, and then there's some fees on top. You actually owe me some money, by the way, Michelle. I forgot to tell you. Yeah, you actually owe me some money.
Michelle, I can definitely help out by giving you kind of a reward. It's going to be the Bruce Hornsby song. Can you guys hear that?
I need nothing else in my life. Thank you.
I'm just rewarding. It's a good time to play Bruce Hornsby right now.
It's not. It's really not.
It is always a good time.
There's actually no good time for Bruce Hornsby. It's like maybe when...
I don't understand what the hate is against Bruce Hornsby. He never did anything against you guys.
You never know. He might hate us too.
Yeah, I think he does. He's never going to come on the podcast, so I think he hates us. Dude, that would be awesome to actually have Bruce Hornsby on the podcast. So I want to talk about corporate stuff for a second. Our training classes. February's coming up around the corner, guys. By the time this podcast is out, we're going to already be on the next stage of pricing. So hopefully you get yourself in there for February. And then we have our class in Amsterdam after that in April. And we'll know about our summer classes shortly, and then the East Coast in Baltimore area in November. So we got a lot going on. We're also heading to the Middle East. Michelle's super excited about that. And we're going to be going over there and doing a class. Man, we got a ton of stuff happening, don't we? Just a ton.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
We are busy.
We're like trying to follow in Dave's footsteps. Dave, how many new releases of set have been issued like in the last couple hours?
Actually, I just did one last week, and then I'm working on a new revision right now to fix a couple bugs. But I did a new version last week that addressed Java 7 Update 45, which made some changes on how the applet behaves.
Nice.
So basically got around all the new security features, and the applet's working just as good as before.
That is awesome.
Yeah. It's still, I mean, when it comes to SE pen testing, I mean, Java is definitely still the most reliable method for us to get in. So it's been really nice.
That's excellent, man.
Yeah.
Anyhow, things are good. We're all busy. We got a lot of stuff coming on the corporate side. So follow us at the social-engineer.com. Hopefully you're involved in the webinar, and we got more stuff to announce later on. But more importantly, our guest. So our guest is Joe Westin. Now, if you haven't heard of that name, you probably will soon. So Joe is a consultant that gets hired by companies because of internal confrontation. So maybe there's some arguments or disagreements inside of a company, and Joe's called in to help to resolve those conflicts. Now, when you think of that, you may say, okay, well, what makes this guy so special? Well, his belief system is that you can resolve any conflict with using positivity as opposed to negativity. So he doesn't teach any of these like really weird negotiation tactics or tactics that rely on manipulation. He relies on very positive empowerment of each individual involved in the confrontation in order to resolve it. So we thought this would be an excellent opportunity for us to talk to a guy that specializes in this and see how we can utilize those skills as social engineers. So Sorry, go ahead.
I'm actually really excited about this one because, I've been a big advocate of, social engineering using positive reinforcement. I mean, it's a very effective, arsenal that we have in our toolkit. And if you look at like human behavior and how people interact with one another, I mean, everybody wants to be in some sort of positive situation. So removing those confines of any type of conflict, I think, is a really good approach. And I'm not hearing this yet. I'm really excited to hear the interview. But I definitely have to agree with this that, positive reinforcement has the best ability for, to be successful in conflict resolution or any type of social engineering things that we do on a regular basis.
And you probably have some interesting insight because you came from it. Also, you worked at Fortune 1000 company before, so you've probably seen conflict resolution from the small company like where you're at now to something huge.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, we can get this more when we get to discussions, but I can't remember a time where I was extremely negative during a meeting. Even meetings where individuals were, very abrasive or conflict-ridden. I just kept a level head. Kind of worked on trying to explain the situation, and I think that that definitely holds true. And I came from a Fortune 1000 company where I was the chief security officer, so. I think it's definitely a good pattern, something that I'm a very big advocate of, which is more on the positive side than anything negative.
Yeah.
Obviously, you get a person every once in a while that it gets under your skin so much that you have to be kind of negative. But those are far and few, rare in between.
Yeah. So let's get Joe on, and we'll actually talk about that part too, like how you do this when it's that one guy who gets under your skin.
And there's only one person that's already in my head right now that I can think of.
I know, me too. Man, starts with D, ends with A. I'm calling Joe. Excellent. So we have our guest on with us, Joe Westin. Joe, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Chris, it's good to be on the line with you.
Yeah, we appreciate your time because we were just kind of talking about this before we had you on, and we're all really excited about this topic because it's something that in dealing with people each and every day, it's going to be really enlightening for us, exciting for us to hear how we can do that, especially when people are in the best of moods, and maybe resolve those conflicts and be able to continue on with our tasks at hand. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself, though. You have such an interesting bio, and maybe you can tell us how you ended up here at this particular point in your career.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to tell you that. I still haven't figured it out, so when I figure it out fully, I can tell you about it or write about it. But so I've developed this work called Respectful Confrontation, and I've written a book called Mastering Respectful Confrontation, and that really, I always say, is based on my lifelong kind of like questioning of human behavior. And my background is a bit diverse, I guess. I grew up in New York City, and I can tell a little bit more about that. And then I ended up saying I was going to bum around Europe for a year. I started in Amsterdam and ended up staying 18 years. Then I went to California, and now I'm living in Washington, D.C. So I've had an opportunity to connect with various people from around the world, different types of people. And one of the biggest things that I've learned from that experience is that everyone has a story, and everyone has an interesting story to tell. And what keeps us from hearing other people's stories is that we don't stop to listen. or we're not curious, or we're too busy, or we're moving too quickly. And what I've learned is that in listening to other people's stories, I learn something. So a lot of my learning has come from just the simple task of being willing to listen. And the work I do, Mastering Respectful Confrontation, is based on really dealing with some basic questions, as I said, that I've always had. One of the basic questions that really inspired the work, or the research of the work, was a question I've always had: why is it, even though we know better, we're a pretty intelligent species, technologically we're pretty advanced, we've got information at our fingertips, resources, why is it, even though we know better, we still have arguments and fights? And we still have war and crime? And, a lot of people might ask that question and just move on and have another martini or something, but this is something that has been sticking with me. And I'd like to believe, from a lot of the work that has inspired me, are a lot of Eastern philosophies like Taoism and Buddhism, and I have a background in martial arts, which I bring to the work as well. So one of the basic premises of those practices or those philosophies is that every phenomenon has a cause, that there's really nothing in this universe that just is. It really came from a certain set of circumstances and causes. So with that in mind, there has to be a cause to the reason that why, even though we know better, we still have arguments and fight, and breakdown of communication, and gridlock in governments, and various things like that. So that's what this exploration is. And I just found that across the board, whether I was working with CEOs, or I was working with spiritual communities, or artists, or children, or prisoners, or veterans, that we were still all basically grappling with the same issues.
So you're, just to kind of get an idea of this maybe for the listeners, your average client for the consulting that you do, would that be corporations?
I'm working a lot with corporations. I do this a lot as a personal development thing, helping people. The essence of the work is respectful confrontation is a method that has it has theory, and it has a number of practices and daily exercises and easy-to-do tools that you can incorporate into a work environment or home environment or with yourself that helps you to stand in your power, speak your truth, get your needs met in a way where you don't get harmed and other people don't get harmed.
So is that the pattern that you just laid out? Those? Can you say that again, maybe?
Sure, I would love to. It's a method that actually helps you to develop the skills and the courage and the wisdom to stand in your power, speak your truth, get your needs met, and do that in a way where you don't get harmed and other people don't get harmed. And this comes from, the different groups that I've worked with, working with very alpha, very CEO-like leaders and alpha-type individuals who usually say to me, I have no problems confronting, I do it all the time, but they don't realize the backlash of what is happening because they're bullying people or they're disempowering people around them. And, at that moment they might get what they want, but down the road they're working with a team that's dysfunctional because the people aren't feeling empowered. The other side is working with a lot of people who are activists or have something to share, who are more coming from really a heart-centered place or want to see good in the world, but don't feel confident enough to actually assert themselves, to actually step up and have their voice spoken for various reasons. And the work is, so it's working with both. And then ultimately it's finding that balance between the proper amount of assertiveness without it turning to aggression.
Well, I think that brings up a great point. And Joe, I'm just really interested in hearing sort of what your assessment is. When people think about assertiveness, a lot of people do confuse the line between assertive and aggressive behavior, making sure that you're heard versus violating the rights of others. So how do you help people determine where that line is and what the point is?
That's a great question.
That is a great question. So I break up my work in the exploration. What I came to that I found that many of us have more to share, and we want to speak our truth. We want to stand in our power. And like I said, for various reasons, we either harm people or we end up harming ourselves because we don't step into that power. And what I discovered is that there are three themes that you could say are unexamined assumptions that many of us hold, that we were taught by our environments, by our government, our culture, our churches, our parents, that keep us limited in that thing where we only think we have a small number of options. And the three themes are that many of us think that true power is the same thing as brute force. When we think, oh, I'm going to stand in my power, mostly the images we have are of mostly men who have misused power and who use brute force and who are bullies. And for those of us who don't want to do that, we think, well, we're not going to do that, so let's just not stand in our power, unfortunately.
But isn't that also a product of this culture, right? I mean, let's say especially in Western culture, meekness and humility are almost seen as weaknesses, whereas people who get things through violence and brute force are usually seen as heroes, even superheroes.
Right. You're absolutely right, and that's what my mission is. You know, I really delineate between 20th century and 21st century, and what you just described to me is the hero of the 20th century. And I think that what's emerging is we're new heroes of the 21st century. And one of the lectures I give is called, there are a few lectures I give, which I think you'll find interesting. One of them is reframing power and leadership in the 21st century. Because what I'm noticing with the CEOs I'm working with and with leaders and managers across the board, the trend now is that leaders are being asked to step into their transparency and vulnerability, that whether they like it or not, and most of them don't like it. And that's why they hire me, or they realize they need training in this, that they, you know, the 80s and the 90s were really about, you know, more profit. If I have to take everyone else out around me, so be it, but at least I'm going home with my seventh car. But that's changing, where their leaders are realizing that's not working anymore. It's costing them a lot more energy. It's costing more money, and that if they can find a way to stand in their vulnerability, therefore in their power, because one of the basic premises I speak to in Respectful Confrontation is I believe it is only in your vulnerability that your true power is revealed.
Can you explain that?
Well, yes, I can. This is fun. That's a lot of ideas. I want to make sure I get back to Michelle's point, though.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, we do this often in our podcast. You say something that triggers a flood of conversation, and we go off on these tangents, you know?
No, I love it. So I'm just trying to map it all. I'm just trying to map it all. I love it, and I love to be taken across the world and back. This is fun.
It's okay. My questions are more important than Michelle's, so it's okay.
Yeah,
no,
I'm not buying into that. I'm totally not buying into that because I don't want to.
Yeah, she will hurt me.
I don't want to be an accomplice to that.
Yeah.
And that's what this work is about, that we can all be heard and we can all get our needs met. And then I don't get harmed.
Yes.
That's really what this is about. So let me finish the three themes, and then I'll get back to the question of vulnerability. So the second one is around how many of us think that confrontation and conflict are the same thing, because we haven't examined it. And what I'm trying to do is to give people more choices. Again, it's this idea of if you think that confronting, which is what I would say is simply speaking your truth and having difficult conversations, if you're thinking that that's the same thing as conflict, then you're also going to avoid having the difficult conversations. And what we're discovering, and I'm hearing this a lot from a lot of talks that I'm part of in government groups or people who are progressively trying to think of ways to solve some of our national problems and world problems, is what I'm hearing over and over again is we have to find a way to have the difficult conversations and to talk with people who do think differently than we do. And that's really what the work is. We don't have those skills. We were never taught those skills. We weren't taught the skills in school of collaboration. We weren't taught the skills of how to speak truth from a place of feelings and needs, which is what I would say is a language of power. The language of ideas and the language of opinions leads very quickly to the language of judgment and prejudice, which is the reason why I think we aren't finding new solutions to our problems. It's staying at a cerebral level. It's not until we can bring it to a feeling level and really identify what is needed, what each person needs, that we can really have real change. So with confrontation and conflict, they are different. And basically, we can talk more about this, but this is because this is the core piece of the work. A conflict is really easy. It's any encounter that creates separation, causes the breakdown of relationship, and disempowers others. And the reason why I say it's easy is because we're built that way, unfortunately. And I would like to talk more about this in terms of security. I think it's a perfect link here. Eventually, I'd like to bring that up. That, any encounter that causes separation, breakdown of relationship, and the disempowerment of others is a conflict. And confrontation is really the opposite. It's any encounter that deepens relationship, brings individuals closer together, and empowers everyone involved. And that, to me, is the 21st century way of doing business, of communicating, that we actually choose into this idea of, I want to stand in my power, because if I stand in my power, particularly in a work environment, in a respectful way, I create a culture that allows others to step into their power. So that here, suddenly I'm working in a work culture, a work environment where everyone feels empowered and where everyone is supporting each other in being heard and being empowered. And I'm seeing how that is increasing productivity in the workplace. I'm seeing how that is eliminating stress. So in a sense, which is a great thing to sell to corporations, is that you can put less effort into more productivity, gain more by doing less. And that simply is by bringing in the element of how human beings are relating to one another. And the last theme that Michelle was asking about is that one of the assumptions we have that we don't examine is that we see assertiveness and aggression as the same thing. But we haven't taken the time to unravel them and to see how they might be different. And for me, they are very different. And unfortunately, it is hard to delineate them because they're so close. It's such a fine line. And with every individual you encounter, they're going to have a different relationship with assertiveness and aggression. So it really calls you to being present and in relationship and being really engaged with that person to feel out how loud can you talk to them, how direct can you be with them, and that takes a lot of work. Which
how do you determine those things? How do you determine those things? How do you determine those answers to those questions when you just met somebody?
Well, if you say something and they slap you in the face, you could basically assume that was a bit too harsh. And that's so the way you measure it is how you gauging the other person's behavior or reaction, mostly. And so for me, again, just to define it, assertive aggression needs you need two parts in any level of aggression. One is there has to be some act. It has to be a gesture. It has to be a words, a facial expression, whether it's written or spoken with words. But that in itself is not aggression. It only becomes aggression when it moves into someone else's personal space and affects them in a negative way, where they feel violated or harmed or disempowered. Then it's aggression. And unfortunately, assertiveness, what makes it unfortunate is that it's pretty much the same thing. Assertiveness is the same thing. Any gesture or any word or even silence on both cases, that moves into someone else's space and has a positive, uplifting effect on them, empowering effect of them is assertiveness.
So you're saying that aggression is the negative side and assertive is the positive side?
Well, I would say that, I try not to use the words positive and negative, but I would say harmful and uplifting, or harmful and empowering.
Why do you? I'm just curious. Why do you choose to not use positive and negative? Is it too black and white?
It's too black and white. Those are two words that we are so triggered by, or triggered either in the way that they upset us, or in the way of as soon as we hear it, we classify it, put it in like a delineation of, I know what he means by that, but maybe he doesn't, maybe they don't. And there's a judgment in it, and I try to take out as much judgment in the words I use as possible. So to say that something is positive is more judgmental than to say it's uplifting. Uplifting is an observation or a result.
Nice. Okay.
As opposed to a positive, that's just a judgment. Well, what does that mean, positive, then? Because for everybody it could be different.
Yep, I can go with that.
So that's one delineation. So one of the important things with this idea of assertiveness and aggression and confrontation and conflict, so in Webster's dictionary, if you look at the definitions between conflict and confrontation, is you'll see that conflict has a lot of words around opposition, war, to fight, to break down, whereas mostly what's in the definition of confrontation is to stand face to face. That's really it. And that the work that I'm doing is this idea of confrontation, if you break it down, which is kind of like a word like with, front, which is front, open. So the work that I'm developing is this idea of with, front, open, which means can you actually engage with someone from a place of vulnerability, of openness, of open-heartedness. And that's where the vulnerability piece comes in, Dave, that
I was just going to add that, and aggression tends to be very fear-based anyway, and so, as you are able to reduce fear, it reduces defensiveness and aggression overall, so I completely agree.
Oh, yeah, definitely, and that's a lot of the work. One of the, I don't know if you've ever heard of the Peace Pilgrim.
I haven't.
Amazing. She has really inspired my work, certainly one statement she made. She's this woman in the 1950s who just got tired of the fact that there was war. And she gave up everything and started walking through the United States with basically a pencil and a toothbrush, and basically ate if people fed her and slept on a mattress if people offered her a mattress. And she had a lot of time to walk, so she had a lot of time to think. And she wrote the most beautiful treatises on peace. If you're interested in that, I should look that up.
Yeah, I wrote it down.
But one statement she said is that we are not going to eliminate world war and crime and the larger problems until each one of us eliminates our own personal psychological violence. Until each one of us wakes up and says, maybe I should take a look at my behavior and how I'm contributing to violence. And that's a big thing, especially working with spiritual communities and with a lot of, charity groups and people who really walk around with their big smiles and basically mean well. What I discovered, one of the big advocates I have is that is to try to eliminate niceness out of a lot of the workplace. And it's not that there's anything wrong with nice, but if we're only doing nice, then it turns into violence on a certain level. And that there's something we can replace it. So if the idea that I'm saying is that conflict is any encounter that creates separation, the breakdown of relationship, or disempowers others, sometimes when we stand there and watch something happen with our big, nice smile and not do anything about it, that is, in a sense, conflict.
Well, what they call that, passive-aggressive?
You could call that, passive-aggressive. That's the point. What the Peace Pilgrim is talking to, not many of us are dropping bombs. I mean, of course, some of us might be, but not many of us. So how are we contributing to violence? And it's mostly passive-aggressive. And I do a lot of work around understanding what that looks like. And most of it is reactive and unconscious. So that's the answer. The question is, why is it even though we know better, we still have arguments and fights? It's our reactive behavior. It's our unconscious behavior. It's still our attachment to the part of the limbic brain or the reptilian brain, and that's a whole study of that, and just the basic patterns of when we're in fight, flight, and freeze. So Michelle's absolutely right. A lot of what causes the breakdown of our relationships is fear-based, is and an inability to open our hearts and have respect and understanding and a willingness to stand in our power.
Yeah, one of the things that we that kind of mirrors some of the things you were saying that we teach in our classes when we talk about the human-based security side is our nonverbals. And we talk a lot about our body language and using something called open ventral displays, or what you said, like the front, everything that's the front of us, and being open tells people that I'm not defensive, I'm not aggressive, I'm trustworthy, you can trust me because I trust you, kind of thing. And it's just a message that we send with the way that we hold our hands, or the way that we stand when we're talking to someone, or the way we approach someone, and before even words come out of our mouth, all of that could send a message to the individual saying, "Hey, I'm a good guy, not a bad guy. You could trust me." So it's interesting to hear that same kind of thing from a different angle. You're kind of saying the same exact thing, but you're talking about this now maybe on a more psychological level, because it's not just what we display, but it's how we think. Being open to other people's views and ideas without confrontation, or with
right.
uplifting confrontation.
Yeah. Well, and what you're saying is basically it's that yes, the message is important, and how you deliver the message is important.
Yeah.
And relationship is important. And cultivating relationship. I'm hearing that a lot. I was invited to be keynote speaker for a group for a conference for executive fundraisers, and the cocktail parties were great because they know how to schmooze, they know how to talk. That was a lot of fun. And I got a lot of information in that, is that they're saying in these economic times, it's very unlikely they're going to find new donors, new clients, so that they realize in order to survive, they have to cultivate, deepen their relationships, and they needed skills to do that. And it's the same thing with, I was asked by a top bank to come in to work with their top managers because they said the same thing. The way we were operating in the 90s, was great, but that doesn't work anymore. We never learned the skills of how to be in relationship, of how to work together. We learned, like that very extreme 20th century competition, basically like, as I said, win-lose. And I think 21st century is the time of win-win. It has to be. We're living in a world right now where we can't isolate. When if you see, like even in politics and in world events, even if people don't want to be filmed, somehow someone still has a phone that works that can still record it. That, we have to learn how to collaborate. And so my work is basically this idea, is teaching. As I said, we weren't taught the skills, certainly not in this country, certainly not in the United States. We were not taught the skills of collaboration. And what I'm advocating is for this idea of benevolent competition, that a competition is essential. We need that for growth, for our own health, for our evolution, and to do it in a benevolent way, where it's basically this idea that I'm going to pull out my personal best and challenge you as best I can, basically for the purpose of calling out your personal best.
You know what's interesting about your philosophy here is I do a lot of work with Dr. Paul Ekman. He's I'm not sure if you heard of him. He's a guy who kind of pioneered the study into facial expressions back in the 60s and 70s, and does a lot of work on nonverbals. And his recent research has been into emotions and how emotions affect us. And he has this belief system right now that some of the problems that we see with the youth today are linked to the type of entertainment that we feed them. How much violence and immorality they see through video games and television programs from very young ages, and how we defend those rights for children to be able to see this kind of stuff. And he's working with some companies to see if games that draw the same emotional content, so the thrill and the excitement that you get from some of these violent games, but with a different intent. Like, instead of being the bad guy that kills everyone, you're supposed to save people from harm. And to do so, he's trying to do some studies on that to see if that would have the same effect as far as thrill and excitement on the youth that play the games, but of course have a more positive, uplifting after effect in teaching them better core standards, as opposed to this aggression and other negative qualities that may say, hey, these are good because when you do this, you win.
Right.
Kind of thing. So I just find that to be you're like the second person now in the last month that I've been talking to that says that they're looking into something about changing people's thinking to a more uplifting way of handling these thoughts and matters. So I find that a little interesting.
Yeah, thanks. I think it's essential, and basically for me, it's about habit. Really, what meditating is just developing a new habit, and and watching TV or playing games. If you whatever you do repeatedly and you do it over and over again, you're wiring your nervous system to need to do it in a sense. So you're developing a habit. I remember. So therefore, I saw this with my very own eyes. When I was living in Amsterdam, I was on my bicycle in the streets, and there was a kid in front of me on his bicycle, maybe about 10, 11 years old, and then a car came out from the right really quickly, almost hit him, but didn't, And the kid's first reaction was to shoot with his fingers. He didn't have a real gun, but his first reaction was to shoot the car.
Huh.
So basically, this kid was already so this isn't even about whether it's good or bad. It's not, you know what I mean? It's not
Right.
about, it's like, this is simply about habit. That this kid's habitual pattern is if something, an outside force comes too quickly, he's going to want to shoot it.
Huh.
So that already confirms for me, yeah, we've got some problems. Because that kid could be our next prime minister of a country or president of a country.
That's interesting. So for us, in our industry, what we're always looking for is there's two methods for us to handle our work, right? So the first thing is something that we call a penetration test, where a company will hire us to simulate an attack on their company. Of course, our intent is different, right? We don't steal their data or their money, but we have to do the same exact kind of attacks that a bad guy would do on their company, so that way we can find out if there's vulnerability. Then once we find the vulnerability, we help them develop educational programs so their people can be trained to not fall for it when it's a real attack. So in our research, Michelle and I especially, because we deal so much with the human side, we're always looking for ways to help companies realize how something could become a vulnerability. And then our goal is always to use the positive side of these things, to never make people overly paranoid. Especially when you look up social engineering, it can have a very negative connotation, and we don't like to go to the level where to say that you have to manipulate people or make them feel bad in order to do this job. Our motto in our company is, in our classes that we always tell our students, is leave people feeling better for having met you. If you do that, you've accomplished your job. But like you said before, there's inherent risk with some of that, because that's the same methodologies that maybe the con men use. So how do you train people to utilize these skills that you're talking about, to be able to be open and honest and truthful with others, but at the same time to not become vulnerable by using those methods?
Right. So what I would ask, the first thing I would say is I would ask us to reuse the word vulnerable, because I'm saying that's an empowering thing. So that vulnerability is I'm delineating that and making a distinction between that and weakness.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought, because now when I use the word vulnerable in that context, I'm thinking of it vulnerable not in the good side, but I'm thinking vulnerable also from that an attacker looks at you as a victim, looks at you as a mark or a target.
Right. An attacker, I would assume, would look at you as a mark or a victim, whether you were vulnerable or not.
Yes.
And I think in your world you would say that you can have a lot of securities and someone will still want to pursue you as a victim. So again, I would make the distinction between vulnerable and weak. And for me, vulnerable is coming from an empowered place, and it's the same thing. So what you described in terms of the work you're doing, which sounds great, is similar to anybody who practices and studies martial arts. One of the forms I learned was called pukulan. It's an Indonesian martial art. It's really very beautiful. And the first phase of it, before you even learn the main form, is you have to learn 108 self-defense moves. And then, once you've learned them, you have to practice them to the point where you can do all 108 moves in less than 6 minutes, and then you graduate to learning the form. So there's a wisdom in that, an ancient wisdom in that, this idea of the most effective way to feel secure and powerful is to learn how to defend yourself. So in a sense, you're saying the same thing, is that you're teaching people techniques of what if someone were to attack you this way, or what if someone were to attack you this way, in kind of a simulation kind of a place, or in a safe environment, so that person eventually, when they have developed a new habit of knowing what they need to do to make sure they're not going to get those attacks, can walk through whatever they're doing with more sense of security and safety and empowerment.
That's a really nice way of putting it, and that's exactly our goal. See, so but yet to not take away the person's natural I'm trying not to use words here that you, because I normally use the word positivity, but I understand what you're saying. But not to take away the person's.
You can use whatever words you want to use.
No, because it makes sense. The way you worded it makes sense. So,
yeah,
our goal is never to take away the person's natural abilities to. We don't want to create a company full of paranoid people that every time someone calls or emails or knocks on the front door that they're out to get you, right? Because that does not foster an environment of achievement. It does not, it doesn't foster the environment of success for a company, whether that's just from personal levels or that. But we try to, and the same philosophies you said from the beginning, with your confrontation courses, is we try to do the same thing to make it very personal for each individual. So if it's personal for you, then it's not just about keeping your company secure. It's about keeping you, your family, your kids, your mom, your dad, everyone around you secure, and that carries over to work. So we don't focus so much on here's what you need to do because your company's so important. It's about you. Let's how do we keep you as a person secure? And if you believe this and it becomes part of your habits, another thing that we teach, which is very interesting to hear you talk about, then it will carry over to everything: work, personal life, school, family, whatever it is.
It's the more self-awareness. I mean, that's the big defense. That's the me, and I think you can translate that to what you're doing. But from a personal point of view, I break down my practice into the respectful confrontation using the metaphor of martial arts into 4 parts. The first part is called the practice of developing the respectful self. The second part is the practice of developing respectful engagement. The third is the practice of developing respectful offense. And the fourth is developing the practice of respectful defense. And that brings in all the parts of how it's possible to stand in your power, speak your truth, get your needs met in a way where you don't get harmed and other people don't get harmed. It all starts with self. And I guess that's important, I would imagine, in the work you're doing, is that with your clients, I'm sure the more they understand the inner workings of security, the more they understand, how hackers might get in, or how their system is set up. The more they understand that, the more secure they're going to feel when those signals begin to start arising to take action. If we don't know, then I just feel, if I can speak for myself, I just feel overwhelmed if I don't know what's possible. Same thing with us as people. If we don't, the more grounded and focused we are and present we are, the more empowered we are. The more we're, and that's the basis of the beginning of. For me, it starts there. The practice of respectful self. The more I said that I know myself, and I know how. The more I'm able to feel out when there might be aggression or dissonance around me, and act on it. I bring in a principle called the 4 pillars of true power, which is basically my antidote to, or the answer to the question: if true power is not brute force, then what is it? And if I don't want to walk through because I do consider myself a nice guy, and I always am. I try to be heart-centered and compassionate, and certainly as a boy, I was, certainly in the United States, this idea of nice guys finish last. That was a lot of the indoctrination that I got, and I'm sure other people got too. And so my question was, does that mean I'm going to be stuck in a corner being a nice guy and finishing last? I don't want that. I want to consider myself powerful, but in a way that really works for me. So I looked towards who did I consider to be powerful people, and I remember seeing films from some of the old martial arts masters, these 80-year-old tiny people who you see these large men pushing on them and they can't move them. They're just immovable. Or these large men that would run towards some of these masters, and the master would take that energy and just literally make those men fly through the room with their force. So I asked myself, what makes them powerful? I said, that seems like power to me. And I came up with 4 qualities that for me, if someone can develop those 4 qualities in an equal mastery, then they are in their power. And those are grounding, focus, strength, and flexibility. And I do a lot of exercises because the work I do is really about it's an embodied practice. It's really getting it in the body, because that's what I've learned about learning is that learning isn't simply gathering information. Learning is the first. Gathering information is the first step of learning. That you get the information. Unfortunately, our world is filled with information gatherers, where we know what's right, but we don't actually act on it. We know that 10 cans of Coca-Cola a day is not good for us, but we still drink it. Am I allowed to say Coca-Cola?
Yeah, sure. We're not sponsored by them, so.
Okay. So the 3 steps are first gathering the information, then contemplating it, which comes more in the heart, which is more an emotional experience of personalizing it. What's my relationship with this information? And then you actually start doing it, trial and error, experiencing it, until it becomes a new habit. When it becomes a new habit, you've learned it.
Now, do you find that that first one, that respecting of self, is difficult for people to accomplish in this society, in this day and age? Do you find that's a challenge?
I would say it is. I don't think that we were trained that way. I don't think we were trained to look within ourselves to find the cause to our problems.
Yeah, so how do you do that? How do you help people to accomplish that task? Because I agree with you. I agree that it's not something that people are generally taught to do, and I think the opposite is true. We tend to blame everything and everyone else for our problems,
right.
as opposed to looking into why this exists. Maybe because I have this flaw I need to fix, or something to that effect.
Well, there are some meditation techniques or some meditations that have to do with mindfulness and concentration, of learning how to connect with a deeper level of your awareness, skills to develop deeper listening, which we all can do, and we all have within us, and just requires practice. That's really the key. There's so much information being given to us through our physical body, our emotional body, our thoughts, our intuition, and the wisdom of our heart, which is, I say, that's where our wisdom resides, is in our heart. That's always talking to us. It's just that for many of us, we're moving far too quickly to take the time to stop and listen. Or we don't trust that as valuable information because we were brought up, you got to get your grades. That's how we determine whether you're successful or not, is based on things like grades and success in that way, and not by hunches or creativity. So we don't trust that, or we don't know the language of it. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of the work I do is beginning to go within the body and into the emotional realm, and realize that is a part of who we are. And every encounter you have. I mean, have you heard of the iceberg model of human interaction?
No.
That's a basic thing that a lot of communication trainings will use that. This idea that in every human interaction, like an iceberg, only the 10% is above the surface of the water, the 90% is below. Huh. And that the part of the iceberg that you have to watch out most for danger is the 90%. It's the same thing with human interaction, that 10% of our interaction is verbal. That sounds like a lot of the work you're doing, and 90% is below the surface, is nonverbal. And nonverbal is more than just physical cues or expression or tone, but it's really also your emotions and your needs and your fears and your culture and your gender and power status. All of those play a role in your communication and how you're engaging and how you collaborate. And that it's not that any one of them is good or bad. They're simply there. And the more mindful you are of what's there, because that's where our reactive behavior is. That's where our unconscious behavior is, isn't that 90%? For those of us who haven't examined it, we don't know what's down there. And they'll bubble up. If you just think about Thanksgiving dinner with your family. That you can say, this time is going to be different. I'm going to be really peaceful and loving. I'm going to have a good time. And within 3 minutes, your mother or your sister or someone doesn't have to say a word, just a facial expression, and you're triggered. And you're gone for the whole day. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah. Yeah. It sure does.
So So that's because what it is, it's the 90%. It's something in your past, in your history, in your, as I said, wounds or trauma or just judgments or how you're perceiving things that gets triggered. And the more mindful we are of those things, the more we can let them not get the better of us.
Yeah. So this is interesting because kind of what happens to us sometimes when we have guests on, like we have this vision of how this is going to fit into our work. And then you take it to a whole nother level. I think what's fascinating for both Michelle and I is that there seems to be such correlations into the things that you teach. You know, maybe like the end result may be different, right? Ours is focused on securing your people, your network, and yours is about how to confront problems positively or better than you do now. But the methodologies to get there seem very similar. You know, you have those four or five things defined pretty well from the beginning of the podcast. But for us, we have like a simple statement that just says, leave people feeling better for having met you, and it kind of encompasses those four things. What that means, no one can be harmed. Like we send, similar to your courses, we send people out on homework assignments, and they have to go and get pieces of information from people, non-damaging pieces of information. And sure, if you were to use manipulation or you were to use a like a dating scene or something at a bar, maybe some of this would be easier to get, but we tell them, no, we're challenging you to do this not that way, right? This has to be a non-sexual confrontation between you and another person, a non-threatening confrontation between you and another person, and the method that you use to get this has to be that when they leave, they feel better because they met you. You made them feel good. You had a conversation with them. You listened to them. You didn't do all the talking. You let them do the talking. And at the end, you'll be amazed when you do this how much people will open up to you and feel better for having done that. And sometimes people come back and they go, man, this wasn't a security class. This was a life class. And I would imagine you probably have very similar effects to the training that you do. For people.
Because I think what you're bringing up is that I think another word that because you can tell I really focus on words because I think there's so much we get triggered by them and we haven't examined them. There's a word that gets a lot of bad rap is manipulation. Yes, it gets a bad rap because it's been used in a negative context, but manipulation can also that's the flexibility part of what I would call skillful means, is that to learn how to adapt and yield and use what's presented to you, say yes to challenges as well as the gifts, and turn them to your advantage for the betterment of a relationship or a work situation. That's manipulation. If anybody is a gardener, you're taking a piece of land and you're manipulating it to make it beautiful. If you raise children, you're manipulating a human being to become a responsible citizen of the planet. So in a sense, manipulation can be beneficial. And I think what it all comes down to, and this comes back to Michelle's question about assertiveness and aggression, is the motivation. It all comes down to the motivation. And to give an example that I always give, the difference between assertiveness and aggression. So just take the same, let's just go with a smile, just a simple gesture. And the first context is that I'd like to give is a young girl is standing on stage. She's going to give a piano recital, and she's terrified. She's paralyzed with fear. She can't get to the piano. And she looks out into the audience and sees her mother smiling her lovingly with encouragement, and that softens her and allows her to sit down and play a beautiful piece of music. Same smile, different context. There's let's say, a group of women having a good time having drinks at a bar, and at the other end of the bar, there's a man sitting there, and one of the women is facing the man, and he's smiling at her and doesn't stop. His gaze just continues to penetrate her and the smile. And she's getting more and more and more uncomfortable to the point where she says to her friends, you know what, let's go to a different bar. So the smile in itself is not aggressive or assertive. It's the motivation behind it.
That's interesting. Yeah, it's a good story, too, and a good way of applying that. That's interesting.
And I'm curious, Michelle and Dave, if I've answered your questions, if you'd like some more information on any of that.
Well, yes, you have, definitely, and I think the point is that people, especially in Western culture, I think do confuse assertiveness and aggression, and they don't know sort of where the dial is between not enough and too much. But I guess my follow-on question is that clearly you work with a lot of people who are alphas in that sense, and you are teaching them to sort of make themselves vulnerable, I think, which is a very difficult thing. So what do you recommend to prevent people? And this is important in terms of social engineering because people are able to sense when you are not, when you're disingenuous. And so being authentic, I think, is a very important point. And so when you're teaching people to really do something that's not in their nature, how do you create an atmosphere of authenticity? And that's sort of applicable across the board in terms of relationships, whether it's social engineering or whether it's creative leadership. So what sort of recommendations might you make?
Well, that's a great question, and there's a number of things. Well, a lot of the work I do is really advocating the power of the heart energy. That I talk about the heart power and cultivating that, and not from a Hallmark cardy kind of perspective of love and passion, but from a real place. The heart. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Heart Math Institute. It's an institute that's for the last 4 decades or so, 4 or 5 decades. And they're in Northern California. They have basically focused for all of that time researching the electromagnetic field of the heart. And I bring this up in my book, Mastering Respectful Confrontation. Basically, their research came up with was that the electromagnetic field of the heart is 5,000 times stronger than that of the brain. And that they've proven now that it can actually penetrate through flesh and bone and maybe even walls.
The what? The electrical energy, you said?
The electromagnetic field of the heart.
Huh. Very interesting.
Which we all have as long as we're alive. So a lot of my work is just advocating from, and you can see, and I remember when I was in the Netherlands doing a lot of corporate training in the 90s, everyone wanted a training in charisma. That was the big thing, and the question was, can you learn charisma or were you born with it? It was huge. People were spending millions to try to learn charisma. And and what I would say is that that's just someone who's resonating a lot of electromagnetic heart energy. So basically what I'm advocating, and believe me, I can spend days to talk about just that. But this idea of how much are you willing to activate your electromagnetic field of your heart? So how much are you willing to be in your heart? And that is how I'm beginning to talk with leaders. And one of the big things I say with that, how open-hearted are you? People say, well, Joe, what are you saying, that you want us to walk around with our hearts open all the time? And now that's another thing. And I say, no, you would be crazy if you did that. But if this is an unexamined thing, if you think that walking through life means your heart has to be totally open or totally shut, then of course you're going to choose for shut, because you would go insane if your heart was totally open. And that's that weakness. That's no longer vulnerable. That's weak. And so it's unfortunate that many of us walk through the world with our hearts closed. And so what I'm saying, what I offer is, that's like saying your heart has an on-off switch. I'm saying let's upgrade to a dimmer switch, where we don't just need an on-off switch. We can actually have a dimmer switch where we have choice, that you can walk into any situation with anyone, even with people you've been with for years, and really feel into yourself. What feels safe? How open can I turn the dimmer? Is that to 80% or 8%? And the thing about that is that even if your heart is only open 3% to a person, it's still open. And the way to cultivate open-heartedness, and this is addressing how I work with leaders, is respect is a way to activate your heart energy. Compassion is a way to activate. Understanding. Curiosity. These are ways. Curiosity is the number one antidote, I believe, to judgment and labeling and classifying and creating barriers.
One of the guys we work with, his name is Robin Dreek. He wrote a book called "It's Not All About Me." The 10 steps to building rapport. Very similar to a lot of the stuff you're saying, but he has this thing he talks about that everybody has their own like personal reality show, and if you go into an engagement with someone interested in learning about that individual, that it will enhance the engagement, right? Because now, instead of going in like with your own personal belief system, judging that person, you go in interested in learning what is it that makes this person up, and that can really change the whole engagement, the way it's viewed by you and the other person. And it kind of just sounds like what you just said.
And that goes back to your thing around trust, that you don't realize what you're winning by just that 30 seconds of asking questions about someone else and learning more about someone else. You don't know what you're winning in the long run, how that ripples out in terms of them trusting you, wanting to collaborate with you, being more creative with you. It's I get that a lot, from managers particularly, like, Joe, do we have to put all this time into the relationship and into having these conversations this way? It seems so exhausting. I said, well, it is exhausting if you're not used to it, and it does take time. But if you don't do it, then, a year from now, because you didn't do it, you're going to have to spend weeks in mediation, dealing with issues. So deal with it, because I say respectful confrontation is one of the most powerful ways to prevent conflict. I don't even call myself a conflict resolution method. I mean, it is. It's more dealing with the skills. In fact, I get hired by a number of companies for that purpose. It's like, how do we teach the people the skills now when it's not escalated to a high conflict yet, where it's contractual disputes and things like that, but where it's manageable, just basic things of just feeling courageous enough to have those uncomfortable conversations as it's arising. I'm doing a lot of these, or I just did a talk at the Eugenics conference.
Never heard.
Conference.
Is it really a security conference?
With Michelle Chaburka, who I'm doing that with, who you might know, Mrs. Y.
Yep.
And she's really advocating for this, bringing the human element into security. And what we were discussing is a lot about this, and I think it's very pertinent for this time. I'm waiting. I think we could say we've had enough time to pass, and I'm waiting for the book to come out. And I think it's more an anthropological study or a sociology discussion about the level of aggression, the internet aggression. We started touching on that with what kids are being taught with games, but just what I notice is because people aren't face to face and they're not breathing the same oxygen, the permission they feel that they have to say the most horrid things to one another, or on blogs and responding to blogs, or in criticisms about things, and that's where you see. That's like the type of aggression that you would call passive aggressive, is that it seeps out, whether we know it or not. It seeps out, and what I'm seeing is how much people just allow their own violence to seep out through the internet, because they're home alone. No one's going to be there to beat on them.
But why do you think that it is that what you just said is the truth, that the internal violence from people seems to come out easier on the internet?
Well, I think it's because, again, it's mostly reactive and unconscious. I don't think people are consciously aware they're even doing it. So if it's coming out there, and these are probably people who are doing a lot of violence to themselves through their diet or isolating, or whatever so it seeps out in so many different ways.
Do you think the lack of personal, the ability for conversation to be personal, affects that too? We don't have that personal connection with other humans over the internet, because you're just a couple words on an email, or you're 140 characters in a Twitter space, or a like on Facebook. You're not really a person. You're just this data on the other end of my screen. Do you think?
I think that's totally the reason. I think because you're not seeing the direct consequences. If you sit with someone and you probably, if you say the same things that you have written on a blog or something, and that person probably would burst into tears, and then you would see the consequences of it and have to deal with it.
No, I was just chuckling because it happened to me. maybe a year or so ago, I was running a competition, and someone had sent me an email, and it was really irritating, and I responded without thinking, and I said some unkind things, and then at the conference, this person came up to me and wanted to talk. Now, not angry, wanted to talk and apologize for what they had said. And now here's this human in front of me that I was previously angry with, and it wasn't an email address anymore. It was a real live person, and they had emotions, and you could see the emotions on their face, and you could feel the emotion in their voice, and that totally changed any ability I had to be angry with that individual. And I thought about that for a long time. How that interaction affected me, because it was just so easy for me to dismiss that person over email, to just kind of blow them off as, well, you wasted my time, so just like leave me alone kind of thing. And now when they were in front of me, that was so difficult to do, because it was a human. It was another person right there, and it wasn't just this imaginary figure through email. And it was a great learning lesson for me, but it really helped, and also some of the things that we teach, and trying to think about those replies before they actually go out.
I think that's a great point, and I think the point you're making there is that, oh wow, how simple that was. That there's so much learning in the simplicity. Yeah. And that's kind of the work I'm doing with Michelle Chaburka, and this idea of something that if you don't have the human element of breathe, what I call breathing the same oxygen. Can you still be as respectful and have the same impact with respectful confrontation? And I say, yes, you can. It just takes more time with each.
Right. I agree. It takes more thought, because you actually have to stop and think about that email sitting on your screen as the person.
And not only get your own message across, but think about the person, and think about what their needs might be, what their feelings are, how they respond to things, and and the main focus of that was, how do you influence users, in a sense? How do you improve their ability to deal with security and things like that? And the basis of my work is that you can't change people. People don't change. What you can do is influence behavior. And that's the essence of the work that I'm doing, is that if you're not happy with your work environment, if you're not happy with your family, with your relationship, we just want the other person to change. We want the situation to change. Well, that you can wish for that for a while, and then if it happens, great, then you're in a fantasy land. If it doesn't happen, which is usually, unfortunately, what reality is, then you got to get to work, and that's uncomfortable.
Yep.
It's hard work.
It sure is.
To be vulnerable and speak your needs and speak your truth, and even more courageous than speaking your truth is hearing the truth of another, because you might not like what you hear. And to still stay in it, to still stay engaged, and for the purpose of influencing behavior.
I love it. This has been fascinating for us, Joe. Really good insight, and it's interesting to hear some of the very same things, just from a wholly different angle, from a different philosophy, different concepts, and a different intent on training. If the listeners are interested in finding out more about you, where can they do that?
Well, the first place would be to start, I would think, is my website, www.respectfulconfrontation.com. You can order my book on the website. On that website, you can also order my book on Barnes & Noble or Amazon. If anyone has any questions or would like to respectfully confront me on some of the things we talked about, I would be glad to get a respectful email from them.
And what's the title of the book again?
Mastering Respectful Confrontation.
Excellent. Now, what about
on Facebook? Facebook, I have a Respectful Confrontation group page, and I have another page for Mastering Respectful Confrontation as well.
Okay, that was my next question. So you answered it. Was a lot of our followers will do things like the social media route. So maybe join you on Twitter or Facebook, and I see all those links there on your page. The workshops that you do, are they public? Is it something that people would be able to find a schedule for and then maybe sign up for one of them?
Yeah, I do. There's a number of the workshops I do are open enrollment. I'm doing them in D.C. right now, and I still haven't put up my 2014 schedule yet, but I will do that. And if there's any companies that would like to bring me in to work with your teams, I'd be glad to do that. Or or if anybody wants to host an open enrollment course in any city, please let me know. I do a lot of work in the Netherlands as well, and we might be doing more work around Europe. Yeah, thank you. I'm glad you're doing what you're doing. I'm glad you're bringing the human element into your field.
Yeah, it's important. It's unfortunately the easiest vector for attackers into companies, and it's also unfortunate that not until recent has it gotten enough focus as an area to be trained heavily. But it has been the focus for a lot of the hacktivists or hacker groups. So now that's becoming more of something that corporations are saying, hey, we need your help to fix this. So so that kind of fostered what we do here. And this podcast is, this is number 51, so it's 51 months old. And for 51 months, we've tried to get folks like yourself on and analyze a different aspect of human behavior and how you use it in your job, and then see how we can apply that and use that same methodology or thought pattern for what we do. So this will be a very interesting one for a lot of people, and I'm sure we'll get a lot of feedback and comments, and I'll let you know when we release it so you can help promote it if you like. And really, I appreciate it. I mean, I think very interesting.
Great. Well, this was I really enjoyed the time.
We'll talk soon.
And you'll send me the links and stuff for when you get it up.
I sure will.
Great. Okay.
Thanks.
Okay. Have a good day.
Joe.
Sure.
As well.
Michelle, thanks.
Bye.
Good to talk to you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, another great podcast. We did unfortunately lose Dave. Dave had to take care of it.
I might add, just in Ping's stead, I just have to give him a hard time for not hanging in there. He did make it, but, I guess that counts as a technicality, but we can't really give him credit for this one.
Making it is only half of it. I mean, you have to stick it out, It's like
Exactly.
saying, if you come to work in the morning, Michelle, but then you just leave 15 minutes later, I can't really count that as you're working. Right? You stay for the... Ouch.
Then we have a problem.
Oh, hang on.
Let's move on.
Let me write this down. Year-end bonus. So, Dave, you came, but you didn't stick, buddy. You didn't stick. At least Ping had the fortitude to not come at all.
Yeah, exactly. She's committed, man.
She's committed. She's committed. Even if it's not the commitment we want, she's committed. So it's okay. So, Joe, wow, interesting how, for me, what I always find interesting about all these things is how many guests we've had on that have such similar philosophies in what they do for work, but wholly different intent, of course, what he does for work is completely different than us, but these four things seem to be summed up in our philosophies too, which is, meet the needs of the target person and make sure that they feel better for having met you, no harm. And
absolutely. And I think the bottom line here is that people need to understand that whether you're doing sort of what he's doing, personal coaching and corporate coaching or social engineering, you have to be genuine and you have to really have a good intention and be coming from a good place.
Yeah, I think that's a good point because between, let's say, Robin and him and Ellen Langer, who we talked to, wrote the book on mindfulness. There seems to be a common theme, which is the coming to someone with only wanting your needs met definitely does not work. They see through that. They see that you're just there to use them. You're not really interested in listening to them. You don't hear what they say. And then at the end of the conversation, they feel a little bit used. But when you come from a real place, a good place, like you said, I like that phrase, that it comes off natural and it comes off something that they want to be your friend.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I found some of his things interesting, and for me, because I just had that conversation with Dr. Ekman in New York City, and he was talking about how he's actually starting this research project now, and he wants to write another book, but he wants to focus on emotions and how maybe the entertainment industry manipulates, if I can use that word, emotions into a negative sphere, and how that's affecting impressionable minds, children and impressionable minds, and then to hear someone else from a completely different field talk about that, maybe from a different stance. But I thought that was really interesting. Here seems to be the focus of people in multiple different spheres and I'm wondering how much play it will get in the industry.
Yeah, I think if people are paying attention, it's really sort of it's starting to gain momentum in lots of different spaces. So it's something to definitely pay attention to.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it will be interesting for us as social engineers, because I'm wondering if we're going to see, from the malicious attacks, let's say, a different approach. People coming more like your friend, like your buddy, like someone in the work sphere that's not stressed, but just trying to be friendly and help you out, and then using that as an attack vector. I'm wondering if we're going to actually see that, because, you look at the CTF, and a lot of the successful calls were of that nature. It wasn't someone calling as a fellow employee who had massive problems. It was someone who was calling doing their everyday job. And hey, let's just chat for a few seconds, tell you who I am, and now maybe you can help me out because I work for the same company you do. And that ended up being really successful. I was a little shocked, but I think we're seeing that now, and I know we're seeing that in our practice. For us, we never use that whole do this or you're getting fired methodology. We always employ the let's be friends and then you'll help me out kind of methodology, and that seems to work for us.
Yep.
Yeah. Very cool. So again, if you want to check Joe out, we got we'll put his website in the show notes, and on the page I can see, I'm looking at it now, he's got his Facebook and his Twitter and his YouTube and LinkedIn accounts. You can link up with Joe and check out his book, Mastering Respectful Confrontation, there on Amazon. And if you're in the East Coast or you're traveling there and you're interested in one of his workshops, he'll have a schedule up for next year. I think it would be cool for us to take one, to see how much it applies into what we do, and it'd be interesting to hear how he teaches this.
Yeah.
So, is there anything that we missed that we needed to mention about us before we take a dive out?
No, I don't think so. We got classes coming up. We'd love to see you all there. We
do classes. We got our SECTF report finally almost done, and we are just busy as a stirred up hornet's nest. I don't even know what that means.
Yeah, nice.
Wow, I was in Tennessee recently, and I heard some of the craziest sayings. I don't even know what you call them, colloquialisms or whatever, but I heard some crazy ones. I won't even try to repeat here because I'll just mess them up. But we're busy, regardless. So if you're interested in following us, you can do that on social-engineer.org, and of course the corporate site social-engineer.com. If you're an IRC user, we're on irc.freenode.net at the channel social-engineer. Twitter accounts, Human Hacker, and also our corporate account is SOC Engineer Inc. You can follow us any of those, and next month we look forward to talking to you again.
How they go.
Until then, see you.
Was that yesterday, or only a moment ago? My heart is gone. I've gone cold. My heart is gone. I've gone cold. The path gives way to a cold winter field. The ground below, hard as steel. Beyond the hill, a distant song. But that hill keeps going on and on. My heart is gone. I've gone cold. My heart is gone. I've gone cold. can't seem to recall any given name. I see the footprints, how they come, how they go. Was that only a moment, or many years ago? My heart is gone,